The billionaire burned our house. Homeless boy told a rancher crying. Watch what happened next. He burned our house. He said people like us don't belong here. Preston Williams' trembling voice breaks as he stands in the rain, barefoot, ash smeared across his hollow cheeks, staring at the glowing horizon where his home once stood. The boy is 10 years old. His clothes hang in burnt tatters. His fingers clutch a singed photograph, the only thing left of his father. Behind him, the sky burns orange. The smell of wet charcoal mixes with the metallic scent of storm clouds. He doesn't blink, doesn't move, just stares at the smoke rising like ghosts from the rubble of everything he's ever known. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. Or if you're new here, welcome to a place where stories don't just entertain, they change you. Before we dive into this one, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And listen, if you haven't subscribed yet, do me a favor and hit that button. You're about to experience something that'll stick with you long after the screen goes dark. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this family. Now let's go back. Back to the night, everything fell apart. 2 days earlier, Preston's world was small but whole. He lived with his mother, Ella William, in a wooden shack on the edge of a forgotten neighborhood, a patchwork of crooked fences, laundry lines, and laughter that echoed through tin roofs. The rich called it an eyesore. The people who lived there called it home. Ella worked 15-hour days washing clothes for families who never learned her name. Her hands were raw, cracked like dried riverbeds, but her smile, when she had the energy, was warm enough to make Preston forget they ate rice and canned beans most nights. Preston didn't mind being poor. He didn't know he was supposed to. He played with sticks in the dirt, built forts from scrap wood, and dreamed about becoming a pilot like his father, a man he barely remembered but loved fiercely through the stories his mother whispered before bed. But their shack sat on land that bordered something else entirely. Patrick Charles's empire. The billionaire owned 12,000 acres of pristine ranch land, luxury resorts, and a reputation that could buy silence from anyone who mattered. His estate stretched beyond the horizon. White fences, imported horses, solar panel mansions that gleamed like teeth. And he wanted more. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. Whispers in the market. Nervous glances exchanged at the water pump. Someone said they saw surveyors. Someone else heard that Patrick Charles himself had called the neighborhood a blight on progress. But no one believed he'd actually go that far. Until the night the flames came. Preston woke to screaming. Not the usual kind. The playful yelling of neighbors or dogs barking at shadows. This was primal. Desperate. The kind of sound that doesn't come from the throat but from somewhere deeper, where fear lives. He bolted upright on his thin mattress. Smoke poured under the door. Mama. His voice cracked, small and swallowed by the roar outside. Ella burst through the door, her face streaked with soot, eyes wild. She grabbed his arm, yanked him to his feet. Run, baby. Don't look back. Just run. But Preston did look back. Through the window, he saw it. Their neighbor's house, fully engulfed. Flames taller than the trees. The old man who used to carve wooden birds was stumbling out, his shirt on fire, collapsing into the dirt. And beyond that, more fires. A dozen homes. 2 dozen. The entire neighborhood lighting up like dominoes made of kindling. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. Ella dragged Preston into the chaos. People running in every direction. Mothers clutching babies. Men throwing buckets of water that evaporated before hitting the flames. Someone was shouting about calling the fire department, but the phones were dead. The lines had been cut. Preston's bare feet slapped against the mud as his mother pulled him toward the edge of the property, toward the dark fields that separated them from the rest of the world. That's when he saw them. Men in black jackets. Watching. They stood at a distance, near a line of black SUVs with tinted windows, arms crossed, faces blank. One of them was on the phone. Another checked his watch like he was waiting for a scheduled event to finish. Preston's stomach twisted. They weren't there to help. They were there to make sure the job got done. Ella saw them too. Her grip on Preston's hand tightened so hard it hurt. Don't stop, she whispered, her voice shaking. Don't you dare stop. They ran until the heat became a memory, and the screams faded into the drumming rain that had started to fall. Too late, too cruel, like the sky was mocking them. When they finally stopped, collapsing under a tree on the far edge of the property, Preston turned back one last time. The entire neighborhood was gone. Just flames and shadows, and ash swirling into the night. His mother sank to her knees in the mud, her chest heaving, her face buried in her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just broke. Right there. Like something inside her had shattered beyond repair. Preston stood frozen, rain mixing with the ash on his face, staring at the horizon that used to hold his home. And that's when he heard it. A voice. Distant. Cold. Carried on the wind from one of the SUVs. Charles said to make it clean. No witnesses. No evidence. Just progress. Preston didn't understand all the words, but he understood enough. Patrick Charles. The billionaire. The man whose face was on magazines. Whose name was on buildings. Whose money could buy anything. He had burned them out. Not because they'd done anything wrong, but because they were in his way. For 2 days, Preston and his mother wandered. They slept under bridges. Ate scraps from dumpsters behind restaurants. Ella tried to stay strong, tried to smile when Preston looked up at her with questions in his eyes, but she was hollowing out, piece by piece. On the 3rd morning, she collapsed. They were walking along a dirt road toward the next town, hoping to find a shelter, when her legs just gave out. She crumpled into the gravel, gasping, her skin pale and slick with sweat. Mama. Preston dropped beside her, shaking her shoulders. Mama, get up. Please. She opened her eyes barely. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Preston's heart slammed against his ribs. He looked around, desperate, but the road was empty. No cars. No people. Just fields and fences and the distant shadow of Patrick Charles's ranch mocking him from across the valley. That's when he saw the sign. Wooden. Hand-painted. Crooked. Harlow Ranch. All strays welcome. Preston had heard of Jack Harlow. Everyone had. The rancher who took in sick animals. The guy people laughed at for caring more about 3-legged dogs than profit margins. Some called him soft. Others called him a fool. But Preston didn't care what they called him. He needed help. He kissed his mother's forehead, promised her he'd be right back, and ran. His bare feet pounded the dirt road, lungs burning, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know what he'd say. Didn't know if Jack Harlow would even listen. But he ran anyway. Because sometimes, when the world burns everything you love, all you can do is run toward the only light left. And when Preston William finally stumbled onto Jack Harlow's ranch, covered in ash, barefoot, and sobbing, the rancher had no idea that the trembling boy at his gate was about to change everything. What do you think Jack will do when he hears the truth? Drop your predictions below. I read every single comment. And if you're feeling this story already, smash that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Jack Harlow was mending a fence when he heard the gate rattle. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow with a weathered forearm. The sun was high, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the fields. His ranch sprawled across 200 acres, modest compared to the empires surrounding it, but every inch was earned with his own hands. 3 dogs lounged in the shade of the barn. A blind horse grazed near the creek. Chickens scattered across the yard like confetti. This place wasn't just a ranch. It was a refuge for the broken things nobody else wanted, including, apparently, a sobbing 10-year-old boy who'd just collapsed at his front gate. Jack dropped his tools and jogged over, his boots crunching against the gravel. When he reached Preston, the boy was on his hands and knees, gasping for air, his small body trembling so violently it looked like he might shatter. Hey, son, easy now. Jack knelt beside him, his voice low and steady. Not the voice of someone startled. The voice of someone who'd seen suffering before and knew panic only made it worse. Preston looked up, and Jack's chest tightened. The kid's face was streaked with ash and tears. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with exhaustion. His feet were torn and bleeding. And in his hand, clutched so tightly his knuckles were white, was a photograph, burned at the edges, barely recognizable. Please. Preston's voice cracked. My mama. She's on the road. She won't wake up. Jack didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy into his arms, light as a bird, bones sharp beneath skin, and carried him to his truck. Preston tried to speak, to explain, but Jack shushed him gently. Don't talk. Just breathe. Show me where she is. Preston pointed down the road with a shaking finger. Jack drove fast but careful, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the boy's shoulder to keep him steady. Preston stared out the window, silent now, his lips moving in what looked like a prayer. Within minutes, they found her. Ella William lay crumpled on the roadside, her arms stretched out as if she'd been reaching for something. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Her clothes were filthy, her face gaunt. Jack lifted her with the same care he'd shown her son and laid her in the truck bed on a blanket he kept for injured animals. Preston climbed in beside her, cradling her head in his lap, whispering words Jack couldn't hear. As Jack drove back toward the ranch, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The boy wasn't crying anymore. He was just hollow, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything soft, leaving only survival instinct and fear. Jack had seen that look before, in the mirror, a long time ago. By the time they reached the ranch, Ella was stirring. Jack carried her inside the small guest room he kept in the main house, a simple space with clean sheets, a window overlooking the pasture, and a cross on the wall his late wife had hung there years ago. He laid Ella on the bed, checked her pulse, her breathing. She was dehydrated, malnourished, running on fumes. But she'd survive. Preston stood in the doorway, frozen, his eyes locked on his mother. Is she going to be okay? His voice was barely a whisper. Jack turned, nodded. She will be. But she needs rest, water, food. And so do you. Preston didn't move, didn't even blink. Jack crouched to the boy's level, his knees creaking. Up close, he could see the layers of trauma etched into Preston's face, the kind that didn't wash off with soap. When's the last time you ate, son? Preston's gaze dropped to the floor. I don't remember. Jack's jaw tightened. He stood, placed a hand on Preston's shoulder, firm but gentle. Come on, let's fix that. In the kitchen, Jack moved with quiet efficiency. He heated up leftover stew, sliced thick pieces of bread, poured cold milk into a glass. Preston sat at the wooden table, small and out of place, his hands folded in his lap like he was afraid to touch anything. When Jack set the food in front of him, Preston stared at it. Go ahead, Jack said, sitting across from him with his own plate. Eat. Preston picked up the spoon slowly, as if testing whether this was real. The first bite hit his tongue, and something broke inside him. He ate like someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. Fast, desperate, barely breathing between bites. Jack didn't say anything, just watched, his heart aching in a way he hadn't felt in years. When Preston finally slowed down, his belly full for the first time in days, he set the spoon down and stared at the table. Thank you, he whispered. You're welcome. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Jack leaned back in his chair, studying the boy. There was something fierce in Preston, buried beneath the fear. A spark that hadn't been snuffed out yet. What's your name? Jack asked. Preston. Preston William. Well, Preston William, I'm Jack Harlow. And you're safe here. You and your mama both. Preston's lips trembled. He nodded but didn't speak. Jack waited. He'd learned a long time ago that silence could be kinder than questions. Finally, Preston looked up. His eyes were red, but there was something else in them now. Something sharp and burning. He burned our house, Preston said, his voice small but clear. He said people like us don't belong there. Jack frowned. Who did? Preston's hands clenched into fists on the table. Patrick Charles. The name hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He went very still. What did you say? Patrick Charles. The billionaire. He sent men. They burned everything. Our house. Our neighbors' houses. Everything. Preston's voice cracked. I heard them say his name. I heard them say he told them to do it. Jack's mind raced. Patrick Charles. The name carried weight in this town. Power. Influence. Money that could bury problems before they ever saw daylight. But more than that, Patrick had history with Jack. Years ago, when Jack was struggling to keep his ranch afloat, Patrick had offered him a loan. No strings attached, he'd said. Just one neighbor helping another. Jack had taken it, paid it back within 2 years. They'd shaken hands, shared a drink, parted on good terms. Jack had even considered Patrick a friend. But that was before the expansion projects. Before the whispers about displaced families. Before the billionaire's empire started swallowing everything in its path. Jack had ignored the rumors. Told himself it was just business. That Patrick wouldn't cross certain lines. Now, staring at this broken boy with ash on his face and truth in his eyes, Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. Preston, Jack said carefully. That's a serious accusation. You sure about what you heard? Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, singed at the edges, covered in soot. He laid it on the table. Jack picked it up, unfolding it slowly. It was a blueprint. Architectural plans. And in the corner, stamped in bold letters, Charles Development Group. The plans showed the neighborhood where Preston had lived, marked with red X's. And overlaid on top, luxury condos, golf courses, resort hotels. Jack's blood ran cold. Where did you get this? It was on the ground, near one of the trucks. I grabbed it before we ran. Jack stared at the paper, his mind spinning. Patrick Charles had burned them out. Not in some abstract, corporate way. Not through lawyers and eviction notices. He'd literally burned their homes to the ground. For profit. For expansion. For progress. Jack set the blueprint down, his hands shaking. Not with fear, but with something hotter. Sharper. Rage. He looked at Preston, at the exhaustion and pain carved into a face too young to carry such weight. And he made a decision. Listen to me, Preston, Jack said, his voice steady. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I promise you this. You and your mama aren't alone anymore. You hear me? You've got a place here as long as you need it. Preston's eyes filled with tears. What? Why what? Why are you helping us? You don't even know us. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over Preston's small one. Because a long time ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. And because... He paused, his throat tight. Because it's the right thing to do. Preston nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. Jack stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the fields. Beyond the horizon, somewhere in the distance, was Patrick Charles's mansion, gleaming, untouchable, built on the backs of people like Preston and his mother. Jack had spent his whole life avoiding conflict, keeping his head down, minding his own business. But some things couldn't be ignored. Some things demanded a reckoning. He turned back to Preston. Get some rest, son. Tomorrow, we're going to figure this out. Preston slid off the chair, exhausted, and shuffled toward the guest room where his mother slept. At the doorway, he stopped and looked back. Mr. Harlow, yeah. Do you think people like us can ever win against people like him? Jack didn't answer right away, because honestly, he didn't know. But he knew one thing for certain. He was going to try. We'll find out together, Jack said. Preston nodded and disappeared into the room. Jack stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the blueprint on the table, the weight of what came next pressing down on him like a stone. He'd spent years building a quiet life, a peaceful life. But peace built on someone else's suffering wasn't peace at all. It was cowardice. And Jack Harlow was done being quiet. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, drop a comment and let me know what you think Jack should do next. And if you haven't subscribed, now's the time. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss a second. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, the blueprint spread out in front of him, a single lamp casting long shadows across the paper. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. Outside, the night was thick and quiet, broken only by the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. He'd been staring at the plans for so long the lines had started to blur. Charles Development Group, luxury condos, a golf course, a resort with infinity pools and helicopter pads. All of it built on the ashes of families who'd had nowhere else to go. Jack's jaw clenched. He thought about Preston's face, the hollow look in his eyes, the way his hands had shaken when he held that photograph of his father. He thought about Ella, lying in the guest room, so broken she couldn't even stand. And he thought about Patrick Charles, sitting in his air-conditioned mansion, sipping expensive whiskey, while children slept under bridges because of decisions he'd made with a pen stroke. Jack's phone sat on the table beside him. He stared at it. He could call the police, report what Preston had told him, hand over the blueprint. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he dismissed it. Patrick Charles owned half the town. The mayor, the sheriff, the city council. Men like him didn't face consequences. They wrote them. A police report would disappear. Evidence would get lost. And Preston and Ella would end up in a system that chewed up people like them and spit them out worse than before. No, this required a different approach. Jack picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in over a year. Sarah Connor. She was a journalist. one of the few left in the area who still cared about the truth more than ad revenue. Years ago, she'd done a story on Jack's ranch, highlighting his work with rescue animals. They'd stayed in touch, exchanging emails and occasional phone calls. If anyone could help expose what Patrick had done, it was her. Jack hesitated, his thumb hovering over her name. Once he made this call, there was no going back. He'd be declaring war on the most powerful man in the county. But then he heard it, soft footsteps behind him. He turned. Preston stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing an oversized shirt Jack had given him. His eyes were puffy from crying, but he wasn't crying now. He just looked tired, bone-deep tired. "Can't sleep?" Jack asked gently. Preston shook his head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire." Jack's heart cracked a little more. He pulled out the chair beside him. "Come here." Preston padded across the floor and climbed into the chair, his legs dangling above the ground. He stared at the blueprint, his small fingers tracing the red X's that marked where his home used to be. "Are you really going to fight him?" Preston asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at the boy, this kid who'd lost everything and still had the courage to ask that question. "Yeah," Jack said. "I am." "What if he hurts you?" "Then he hurts me." "What if he wins?" Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he placed his hand over Preston's. "Then at least we tried. At least we didn't let him get away with it without a fight." Preston nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression, fear giving way to something harder, something like hope. "My dad used to say that too," Preston whispered. "He said sometimes you gotta stand up, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." "Your dad sounded like a smart man." "He was." Preston's voice cracked. "He died when I was 5. Mama said he was fixing a roof and fell. Just fell. And then it was just us." Jack squeezed the boy's hand. "Well, you're not alone anymore." Preston looked up at him, his eyes glistening. "Promise. Promise." Jack stood, his decision made. He hit the call button. Sarah Connor answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "This better be good. Harlow, do you know what time it is?" "I need your help," Jack said. "And it can't wait." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, sharper, more alert. "I'm listening." Jack told her everything. Preston's story, the fire, the blueprint, Patrick Charles's name stamped on plans that turned human beings into collateral damage. When he finished, the line was silent for a long moment. "Jack," Sarah said carefully, "do you understand what you're asking me to do? Patrick Charles has lawyers who eat people like us for breakfast. If we go after him without ironclad proof—" "I have proof," Jack interrupted. "I have the blueprint. I have a witness. I have burn scars on a 10-year-old boy's feet. That's not enough. Not for a man like him. We need more. We need someone on the inside. Someone who can confirm he ordered it." Jack's mind raced. "Then we find them." Sarah sighed. "Meet me tomorrow morning. Bring the boy and the blueprint. I'll see what I can do." "Thank you, Sarah." "Don't thank me yet. If this goes sideways, we're both finished." She hung up. Jack set the phone down and looked at Preston. "You're going to have to be brave again tomorrow. Think you can do that?" Preston nodded, his jaw set with a determination that didn't belong on a face that young. "Good," Jack said. "Now get some sleep. We've got a long day ahead." Preston slid off the chair and shuffled toward the guest room. At the door, he paused. "Mr. Harlow?" "Yeah." "Thank you for believing in me." Jack's throat tightened. "Always, son." Preston disappeared into the room. Jack sat back down, staring at the blueprint one more time. Tomorrow, the real fight will begin. The next morning arrived too fast. Jack woke Preston and Ella early, fed them breakfast, and explained the plan. Ella was still weak, but when she heard what Jack intended to do, a fierce light sparked in her eyes. "I want to come," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "You need to rest. I need to see this through." She looked at Preston, then back at Jack. "He took everything from us. I'm not hiding while you fight our battle." Jack saw the steel in her gaze and knew better than to argue. They piled into Jack's truck and drove into town. Sarah Connor was waiting for them at a small diner on the edge of Main Street, a place where locals gathered and outsiders stood out. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and a notebook already open on the table. When Preston walked in, still wearing Jack's oversized clothes, Sarah's expression softened. "You must be Preston," she said gently. Preston nodded, shy, staying close to his mother. They sat in a corner booth. Jack slid the blueprint across the table. Sarah studied it, her eyes narrowing. She pulled out her phone, snapped photos from multiple angles, then looked up. This is damning, but it's circumstantial. Any halfway decent lawyer will argue it was stolen, fabricated, or taken out of context. Then what do we need? Jack asked, frustration creeping into his voice. A confession, or someone who was there. Someone who heard Patrick give the order. Ella leaned forward. There were men. At the fire. Watching. They had radios. One of them was on the phone. Do you remember what they looked like? Ella closed her eyes, concentrating. One had a scar. On his neck. Shaped like a hook. Sarah's eyes lit up. She scrolled through her phone, pulled up a photo, and turned it toward Ella. This him? Ella's breath caught. Yes, that's him. Sarah smiled grimly. That's David Mills. He's head of security for Charles Development. If he was there, he didn't just watch, he organized it. Can we get to him? Jack asked. Maybe. He drinks at a bar on the south side every Friday night. Likes to brag when he's had a few too many. Sarah looked at Jack. But approaching him is risky. If he tips off Patrick, then we don't approach him. We record him. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You want to wire the bar? I want to get him talking. Get him to admit what he did. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Jack was quiet for a moment, the plan forming in his mind. Let me worry about that. That night, Jack walked into the Rusty Nail, a dive bar that smelled like stale beer and bad decisions. David Mills was exactly where Sarah said he'd be. Corner booth, halfway through a bottle of Jack Daniels, laughing too loud with two other men in black jackets. Jack's heart pounded, but he kept his face neutral. He ordered a beer at the bar, sat 2 stools down from Mills's line of sight, and waited. Sarah's voice crackled softly in the tiny earpiece she'd given him. Recorder's live. Get him talking. Jack took a sip of his beer, then turned slightly, as if noticing Mills for the first time. You're David Mills, right? Jack said, loud enough to carry. Mills looked over, eyes narrowed with suspicion and alcohol. Who's asking? Jack Harlow. I own a ranch near the Charles estate. Recognition flickered in Mills's eyes. Yeah, I know who you are. The guy who saves puppies. The other men snickered. Jack ignored it. Heard you've been doing some work for Patrick. Big expansion project. Mills smirked. Something like that. Must pay well. Better than saving puppies. I'll tell you that much. Mills took another swig. Man knows what he wants and doesn't let anything get in his way. That's how you build an empire. Even if it means burning a few bridges. Jack said carefully. Mills laughed. A cold, ugly sound. Bridges. Houses. Same difference. Poor people should have moved when they had the chance. Jack's grip tightened on his beer bottle. So you were there. At the fire. Mills's smile widened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. For a moment, the bar seemed to hold its breath. Mills leaned back, studying Jack with drunken amusement. You recording this or something, cowboy? Jack's blood turned to ice. But he kept his voice steady. Just making conversation. Mills stared at him for a long, tense moment, then burst out laughing. Relax. I'm screwing with you. He waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, I was there. So what? Those squatters were sitting on prime real estate. Patrick wanted it cleared. We cleared it. End of story. You burned their homes. We accelerated the process. Mills grinned. And before you get all high and mighty, save it. This is how the world works. The strong take. The weak move. That's business. Jack stood slowly, his hands trembling. Not with fear, but with barely controlled fury. You're proud of it. Damn right I am. Got a fat bonus and a promotion. Mills raised his glass in mock salute. To progress. Jack's vision blurred red. But Sarah's voice crackled in his ear, urgent. You got it. Now get out of there before you do something stupid. Jack forced himself to turn and walk toward the door. Behind him, Mills called out, Say hi to Patrick for me. Oh wait, you're not important enough to get a meeting. Laughter erupted. Jack stepped out into the cool night air, his chest heaving. Sarah was waiting in her car across the street. Jack climbed in. Tell me you got that, Jack said. Sarah held up her phone, a recording app glowing on the screen. Every word. Jack closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Now what? Sarah's expression was grim. Now we go nuclear. What do you think happens when this recording goes public? Drop your predictions below. And if this story has you hooked, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to believe what comes next. The video went live at 6 a.m. Sarah had worked through the night, editing the audio recording of David Mills's confession into a short, devastating clip. She paired it with images of the burned neighborhood, photos of Preston's scarred feet, and a blueprint with Patrick Charles's company logo stamped across it. The headline was simple: Billionaire ordered arson to displace poor families. Security chief confesses. She posted it on her independent news blog, then shared it across every social media platform she could access. By 7 a.m., it had 3,000 views. By 8 a.m., 15,000. By noon, the video had gone viral. Jack was feeding the horses when his phone started buzzing. Not just a few notifications, a flood. Texts, calls, emails, voicemails piling up faster than he could process. He pulled out his phone, and his breath caught. Sarah's video was everywhere. Local news stations were picking it up. National outlets were reaching out for comment. The hashtag Justice for Preston was trending. But it wasn't just support. There was anger too. Disbelief. Accusations that the recording was fake, that Jack was chasing fame, that this was a shakedown attempt against an innocent businessman. And then there were the threats. You just signed your death warrant, Harlow. Patrick Charles will destroy you. Watch your back, cowboy. Jack's jaw tightened. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and returned to the barn, trying to focus on the work. But his hands were shaking. Preston appeared in the doorway, holding a piece of bread he'd been nibbling. His eyes were wide. Mr. Harlow? There's a lot of cars coming up the road. Jack stepped outside. A line of vehicles was snaking up the dirt driveway toward his ranch. News vans, cameras, reporters with microphones. Stay inside with your mama, Jack said quickly. Don't come out unless I call you. Understand? Preston nodded and disappeared into the house. Jack walked toward the gate, his heart pounding. The first reporter out of the van was a woman in a sharp blazer, her cameraman already filming. Mr. Harlow, is it true you have the boy who survived the Charles arson here on your property? No comment, Jack said, holding up a hand. Is the recording authentic? Have you spoken to Patrick Charles? No comment. Are you prepared for legal retaliation? Jack stopped, looked directly into the camera. I'm prepared to tell the truth. That's all. More questions flew at him, overlapping, chaotic. Jack turned and walked back toward the house, ignoring the shouts behind him. Inside, Ella was standing at the window, her face pale. This is because of us, she whispered. We brought this on you. No, Jack said firmly. Patrick Charles brought this on himself. But even as he said it, a knot of fear twisted in his stomach. Because he knew what came next. Patrick Charles sat in his office, watching the video for the 5th time. His expression was unreadable. Across from him, his lawyer, a silver-haired man named Vincent Vega, leaned forward, hands steepled. This is manageable, Vega said smoothly. Mills was drunk. The recording is inadmissible in court. We discredit the source, paint the rancher as an opportunist, and bury this in litigation before it gains more traction. Patrick didn't respond. He just stared at the screen, at David Mills's smug face, at the audio waveform pulsing with every damning word. Sir, Vega prompted. Patrick finally looked up. His eyes were cold. Calculating. Who is Jack Harlow? Vega consulted his tablet. Small-time rancher. 200 acres. No criminal record. Runs an animal rescue operation. Financially stable, but not wealthy. He took a loan from you 8 years ago. Paid it back in full. So he's nobody. Essentially. Patrick stood, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking his estate. Miles of pristine land stretched to the horizon. His empire, built brick by brick, deal by deal. And now some nobody rancher with a bleeding heart thought he could tear it down. Find out everything about him, Patrick said quietly. Debts, liens, violations. I don't care how small. And find out who else is involved. The journalist, Sarah Connor. She's been a thorn in your side before. Then it's time to pull the thorn out. Patrick turned, his expression hard. I want this shut down. Quietly. Efficiently. Do whatever it takes. Vega smiled. Consider it done. 2 days later, Jack received the first blow. A letter from the county inspector's office, delivered by certified mail. Dear Mr. Harlow, it has come to our attention that your property may be in violation of several county codes regarding livestock management, sanitation, and zoning regulations. An inspection has been scheduled for. Jack crumpled the letter in his fist. He'd been running this ranch for 15 years. Never a single violation. Never a complaint. And now, 2 days after the video went viral, suddenly he was a code enforcement priority. Sarah called an hour later. "They're coming after me too," she said, her voice tight. "My website got hit with a DDoS attack. Someone filed a defamation suit, and I just got a call from my landlord. Apparently, there's been a complaint about my lease." Patrick. Of course it's Patrick. He's trying to bury us before this gets any bigger. Jack looked out the window, where Preston was playing with one of the dogs in the yard. The boy was smiling, actually smiling, for the first time since Jack had met him. "We can't back down," Jack said. "I know, but we need to be smart. He's going to keep escalating. Let him." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Jack, I need you to understand something. Men like Patrick Charles don't fight fair. If he feels cornered, he'll do whatever it takes to win. And that includes hurting people you care about." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance." That night, Jack sat down with Preston and Ella at the dinner table. The food was simple: roasted chicken, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread. But it was the first real meal they'd shared as something close to a family. Ella had started to regain some color in her cheeks. She was still weak, still haunted, but there was a flicker of strength returning to her eyes. Preston had barely left Jack's side all day, following him around the ranch, asking questions, helping with chores. The boy was hungry for structure, for purpose, for something to hold on to. "Mr. Harlow," Preston said, pushing peas around his plate. "What happens if Mr. Charles wins? What happens to us?" Jack set down his fork. "He's not going to win. But what if he does?" Ella reached over, placed her hand on Preston's. "Baby, don't think like that." "But Mama, what if?" "Preston." Jack's voice was firm but gentle. "Look at me." The boy looked up, his eyes wide and fearful. "I made you a promise," Jack said, "that you and your mama have a place here as long as you need it. That promise doesn't change because some rich man throws his weight around. You understand?" Preston nodded slowly. "Good. Now eat your dinner." They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the clinking of forks and the distant hum of crickets outside. Then Ella spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Why are you doing this, Jack?" He looked up. "What do you mean? You could have just given us a meal and sent us on our way. You could have stayed out of it. But you didn't." Her eyes searched his face. "Why?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I had a daughter once," he finally said. Preston and Ella both went still. Jack stared at his plate, the words heavy on his tongue. He hadn't talked about this in years, hadn't even let himself think about it. Her name was Lily. She was 7. His voice was rough like gravel. "My wife and I, we had a small place, not much different from this. We were happy. And then one winter, Lily got sick. Pneumonia. We didn't have insurance. Couldn't afford the hospital." Ella's hand went to her mouth. "I went to every bank, every lender, begging for a loan. Got turned down everywhere. Too risky, they said. Not enough collateral." Jack's hands clenched into fists. "By the time we scraped together enough money, it was too late. She died in my arms on the way to the emergency room." A tear slid down Ella's cheek. Preston stared at Jack, his young face etched with pain. "And couldn't forgive me," Jack continued. "Hell, I couldn't forgive myself. She left 6 months later. I haven't seen her since." The silence was suffocating. Jack looked up, his eyes red but fierce. "So when I see a boy who lost everything because some rich bastard decided his profits mattered more than people's lives, I don't walk away. I can't." His voice cracked. "Because maybe if someone had fought for us back then, Lily would still be here." Ella stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around Jack's shoulders. He stiffened, then slowly relaxed, his eyes closing. "Thank you," Ella whispered, "for giving us a chance to fight." Preston got up too, hugging Jack from the other side. And for the first time in a decade, Jack Harlow let himself cry. The next morning, the county inspector arrived right on schedule. His name was Ronald Kerner, a thin man with a clipboard and an attitude that screamed bureaucrat. He spent 3 hours combing through every inch of Jack's property, taking photos, making notes, his face pinched with disapproval. Jack followed him silently, his jaw clenched. Finally, Kerner turned to him, flipping through his notes. "Well, Mr. Harlow, I've found several violations. Improper fencing on the south pasture, inadequate waste disposal, unlicensed animal housing. You're looking at significant fines and a mandatory remediation period." That's bullshit and you know it, Jack said evenly. Kerner's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. I've been running this place for 15 years without a single issue. Now, 2 days after I go public about Patrick Charles, suddenly I'm a code enforcement nightmare. You don't see the problem with that. I don't involve myself in politics, Mr. Harlow. I enforce the law. Yeah, selectively. Kerner's face flushed. You'll receive the full report within a week. If the violations aren't corrected within 30 days, we'll begin proceedings to revoke your operational license. He walked back to his car, climbed in, and drove off in a cloud of dust. Jack stood there, fists clenched, trembling with rage. Preston appeared beside him. He's lying, isn't he? The boy said quietly. Yeah, Jack said. He is. So what do we do? Jack looked down at Preston, this kid who'd already survived so much and still had the courage to ask what came next. We fight harder. That evening, Sarah called with news. I found something. One of my sources says there's a planning commission meeting tomorrow night. Patrick's team is presenting the final approval for the resort development, the one built in your neighborhood. Can we stop it? Jack asked. Maybe, if enough people show up and oppose it. But Jack, most of the town is terrified of Patrick. They won't speak out. Then we make them listen. Ow! Jack thought for a moment. Bring Preston. What? Bring Preston to the meeting. Let him tell his story. Let them see what their silence costs. Sarah was quiet. Jack, that's asking a lot of 10-year-old. Jack looked across the room, where Preston was reading a book Ella had found in the house. I know, but he's stronger than people think. I'll talk to him, Ella said from the doorway. She'd been listening. Jack nodded. The next night, the town hall meeting room was packed. Citizens filled the chairs, lined the walls, whispered nervously to each other. At the front of the room, Patrick Charles sat behind a long table with his lawyers and development team, looking calm and composed in an expensive suit. Jack walked in with Sarah, Ella, and Preston. The room went silent. All eyes turned to them. Patrick's gaze locked onto Jack, cold and unreadable. Jack didn't flinch. He guided Preston to a seat near the front and sat beside him. The meeting began. Patrick's team presented glossy renderings of the resort, luxury suites, golf courses, spas. They talked about job creation, economic growth, and progress. They didn't mention the families they'd burn out to make it happen. When they finished, the chairman of the planning commission, a round man named Bill Tanner, cleared his throat. We'll now open the floor for public comment. Anyone wishing to speak, please approach the microphone. No one moved. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and thick. Then Preston stood. Jack's heart clenched. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Preston whispered. He walked to the microphone, too short to reach it without standing on his toes. Someone adjusted it for him. Preston looked out of the crowd, dozens of faces staring back at him. And then he spoke. My name is Preston William. I'm 10 years old. And that man, he pointed at Patrick Charles, burned my house down. The room erupted. Are you still with me? Because this is where everything changes. Drop a comment if you think Preston's bravery will break through. And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The room didn't just erupt. It exploded. People jumped to their feet. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shock, anger, and disbelief. Reporters in the back started filming. Patrick's lawyers leaned in, whispering urgently. Bill Tanner banged his gavel. Order. Order in this chamber. But Preston didn't back down. He stood at that microphone, small and trembling, but his voice grew louder. He burned my house down. Preston repeated, his words cutting through the chaos. He burned down my mama's house and my neighbors' houses, and he didn't care that people lived there. He didn't care that we had nowhere to go. This is absurd. One of Patrick's lawyers shot to his feet. Mr. Chairman, this child is clearly being coached. I'm not being coached. Preston's voice cracked, but he didn't cry. Not yet. I saw the men. I heard them say his name. I found the papers with his company on them. Sarah stood, holding up her phone. I have a recorded confession from David Mills, head of security for Charles Development Group, admitting to the arson on Patrick Charles's orders. It's already been heard by over 2 million people online. The room erupted again. Patrick Charles remained seated, his expression carved from stone. Bill Tanner banged the gavel again, his face red. Enough. Young man, these are serious allegations. They're true, Preston shouted, and now the tears came. We didn't do anything wrong. We just lived there. And he took everything. His small hands gripped the microphone stand. My mama can't even stand up anymore because she's so tired and scared and hurt. And it's his fault. Ella stood from her seat, her own tears streaming down her face. But she didn't go to Preston. She knew he needed to finish this. Jack's hands were clenched, so tight his knuckles had gone white. And then Patrick Charles stood. The room fell silent. He buttoned his suit jacket with calm, deliberate movements, then walked to the front of the room. He didn't approach Preston, just stood a few feet away, looking down at the boy. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Patrick spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the dead silent room. "What's your name, son?" Preston swallowed hard. "Preston William." "Preston." Patrick nodded slowly, as if considering. "How old are you?" 10. 10 years old. Patrick looked out at the crowd, then back at Preston. "And you believe I ordered the burning of your home?" "I don't believe it." "I know it." Something flickered across Patrick's face, too quick to read. He turned to the Planning Commission. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a statement." Bill Tanner looked uncertain. "Mr. Charles, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue." "I think it's exactly the appropriate venue." Patrick walked to the center of the room, all eyes on him. Jack's pulse hammered. This was it. Patrick was going to deny everything, threaten lawsuits, destroy them with words the same way he destroyed Preston's neighborhood with fire. But then Patrick Charles did something no one expected. He looked directly at Preston and said, "You're right." The room went completely still. "I did order it," Patrick continued, his voice steady. "Not the fire, specifically, but the removal of that neighborhood. I hired a team to clear the land. I told them to do whatever was necessary to expedite the process. I knew there were families living there. I knew they had nowhere else to go." He paused, and I chose profit over people. The silence was deafening. Jack's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Men like Patrick Charles didn't confess. They didn't admit guilt. They buried it under lawyers and money and power. Sarah was already recording, her hands shaking. "Why?" Preston whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did you do it?" Patrick was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Because I forgot that land doesn't just belong to whoever can afford it. It belongs to whoever makes it home." He looked at the Planning Commission. "I'm withdrawing my development proposal. Effective immediately." Chaos erupted. Patrick's lawyers were on their feet, shouting objections. Bill Tanner banged his gavel uselessly. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. But Patrick wasn't done. He turned to Jack. "You, Harlow, you have the blueprint, the recordings, the evidence. I won't fight you in court. I won't bury you in litigation." His jaw tightened. "But I want to make this right. Tell me how." Jack stood slowly, his mind spinning. This had to be a trick, a manipulation. Men like Patrick Charles didn't just surrender. "You can't make this right," Jack said, his voice hard. "You can't bring back what you burned." "No, but I can rebuild it." The room went silent again. Patrick pulled out his phone, made a call. "Jenkins, it's Patrick. I need you to set up a fund. $50 million. For reconstruction." He looked at Preston. "Every family that was displaced will receive a new home, fully paid for. And the boy's family gets the first one built." Preston's eyes widened. Ella gasped, her hand going to her mouth. Jack shook his head. "This doesn't erase what you did." "I know." Patrick's voice was heavy. "But it's a start." He ended the call, pocketed his phone, and looked around the room one last time. "I'll cooperate fully with any investigation. I'll testify against anyone in my organization who broke the law, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man I should have been in the first place." Then he walked out, just like that, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence and a 10-year-old boy who'd just changed everything. Outside the town hall, the night air was cool and electric with energy. Jack stood with Preston, Ella, and Sarah, trying to process what had just happened. Did that really just happen? Sarah asked, her voice dazed. Did Patrick Charles just confess and promise to rebuild everything? "I don't trust it," Jack said. "This could be a play, a way to control the narrative before it destroys him completely." Or, Ella said softly, "Maybe he meant it." Jack looked at her. "You really believe that?" "I don't know." Ella knelt beside Preston, brushing his hair back. "But I know my son just stood in front of the most powerful man in the county and told the truth. And that man blinked first." Preston looked up at Jack, his eyes wide. "Did we win?" Jack wanted to say yes. I want to believe it was over. But something gnawed at him. Something felt off. Before he could answer, a black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Vincent Vega, Patrick's lawyer, leaned out. Mr. Harlow. A word. Jack tensed. I've got nothing to say to you. It's about Patrick. There's something you need to know. Vega's expression was grim. Something he didn't tell you in there. Sarah stepped forward. Whatever you're selling, we're not buying. I'm not selling anything. I'm trying to prevent a disaster. Vega glanced at Preston, then back at Jack. Patrick Charles has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He has 3 months to live. Maybe less. The words hit like a freight train. Jack's breath caught. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. He found out 2 weeks ago. Vega continued. Right before the video went viral. That's why he confessed tonight. That's why he's trying to make things right. He doesn't have time for a legal battle. He doesn't have time for anything except trying to fix what he broke before he dies. Sarah stared. You're lying. I wish I was. Vega pulled out a folder, handed it through the window. Medical records. Confirmed by 3 specialists. It's real. Jack took the folder with numb fingers, opened it. The documents were authentic. Terminal diagnosis. Aggressive. Inoperable. Patrick Charles was dying. Vega's voice softened. He knows what he did was unforgivable. But he's trying, in the only way he knows how, to leave something better behind than the man he was. The window rolled up, and the car drove away. Jack stood there, the folder trembling in his hands. Preston tugged on his sleeve. Mr. Harlow? What does it mean? Jack didn't know how to answer. Because everything had just changed. The villain wasn't just a villain anymore. He was a dying man trying to find redemption. The fight wasn't over, but it wasn't what Jack thought it was. It means, Jack finally said, his voice rough, that things are more complicated than we thought. Later that night, back at the ranch, Jack sat on the porch with Ella. Preston had fallen asleep inside, exhausted from the emotional weight of the evening. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Ella sat beside Jack on the wooden bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. Do you believe he's really sick? She asked quietly. The documents looked real. Jack stared out at the dark fields. But even if he is, does it matter? Does dying erase what he did? No. Ella's voice was firm. But maybe it explains why he's trying to fix it now. Jack was silent. Ella turned to him, her eyes searching his face in the dim porch light. Jack, you saved us. You gave us shelter when we had nothing. You fought for us when no one else would. You didn't have to do any of that. I didn't have to. Why? Because of your daughter. Jack flinched to the mention of Lily. Ella reached over, placed her hand on his. You couldn't save her, but you saved us. That means something. Jack's throat tightened. It doesn't bring her back. No, but honors her. Every person you help, every stray you take in, every fight you take on for someone who can't fight for themselves. You're keeping her alive. You're being the man she would have been proud to call her father. A tear slid down Jack's cheek. Ella squeezed his hand. Patrick Charles is trying to find redemption before he dies. But you, Jack Harlow, you've been living redemption every single day since you lost her. Jack turned to her, saw the tears on her face too, and something broke open inside him. He pulled her into his arms, and she held him while he cried. For Lily, for Preston, for all the broken things in the world he couldn't fix but kept trying anyway. When they finally pulled apart, Ella looked at him with something new in her eyes. Something that looked like hope, and maybe something more. Thank you, she whispered, for giving us a reason to believe again. Jack nodded, unable to speak. They sat there in the quiet, hands still intertwined, the weight of the day settling around them. And for the first time since this all began, Jack felt something shift. The fight wasn't over. But maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that didn't end in more burning. Inside, Preston stirred in his sleep, clutching the photograph of his father. In his dreams, the house wasn't burning anymore. In his dreams, he was building something new. This story just took a turn nobody saw coming. What do you think happens next? Is Patrick's redemption real? Or is there another twist waiting? Drop your thoughts below. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This is only going to get more intense. 3 days after Patrick's confession, everything fell apart. It started with a phone call. Jack was in the barn, mucking out stalls while Preston helped by carrying buckets of feed, when Sarah's name lit up his phone screen. Tell me you're seeing this, Sarah said without preamble. Her voice was tight with fury. Seeing what? Check the news. Any channel. They're destroying us. Jack's stomach dropped. He pulled out his phone, navigated to the local news site. The headline hit him like a fist. Dying billionaire's act of mercy exploited by opportunistic rancher. Below it, a photo of Jack standing outside the town hall meeting. The caption read, Jack Harlow, who critics say manipulated a traumatized child to extort money from a cancer-stricken philanthropist. Jack's vision blurred. What the hell is this? Patrick's PR team, Sarah said bitterly. They spun the whole thing. Made him look like a repentant saint, and you like a vulture circling a dying man. Jack scrolled through the article. Every word was poison. Sources close to Patrick Charles reveal that the billionaire, recently diagnosed with terminal cancer, was moved by the plight of displaced families and voluntarily offered to fund reconstruction, only to be ambushed by Jack Harlow, a small-time rancher with a history of financial instability. History of financial instability. Jack's voice shook. I took one loan 8 years ago and paid it back early. Harlow allegedly coerced a vulnerable child into making false accusations in front of the planning commission, knowing Charles was too ill to defend himself properly. This is insane, Jack breathed. It gets worse, Sarah said. They're saying I fabricated the recording. That Mills was drunk, and I edited his words out of context. There's already a defamation suit filed against me, and 2 sponsors just pulled out of my blog. Jack's hand clenched around the phone. Patrick did this. He confessed to buy time, to control the narrative. I don't think it was him, Sarah interrupted. The statement came from his corporate office, but Patrick himself hasn't said a word. I think his people are trying to protect his legacy while he's too sick to stop them. Jack felt the walls closing in. Preston appeared in the barn doorway, his face pale. Mr. Harlow, there's people outside, with signs. Jack's blood ran cold. He walked to the front of the property, and his worst fears materialized. A crowd had gathered at his gate. 20, maybe 30 people, holding signs. Stop exploiting the sick. Harlow the vulture. Justice for Patrick Charles. Some were shouting. Others were filming. A few had their children with them, using this as some kind of grotesque teaching moment. Jack stood there, paralyzed. How did this happen? How had he gone from exposing the truth to being the villain? Get back inside, Jack told Preston quietly. But now, Preston ran. Jack walked up to the gate, facing the crowd. His heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral. You all need to leave. This is private property. A woman in the front, someone Jack recognized from church, jabbed her finger at him. You should be ashamed. That man is dying, and you're trying to profit off his guilt. I'm not. You used a child, someone else shouted. You coach him to lie. That's not true. Patrick Charles built this town, another voice yelled. He gave us jobs, funded our schools, and you're trying to destroy him in his final days. The crowd surged forward, angry, righteous. Jack's hands trembled, not with fear, with helpless rage, because they weren't listening. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a villain, and he was convenient. A rock sailed over the fence, smashing against the side of his barn. Then another. That's enough, Jack roared. But it wasn't enough. More rocks. Someone threw a bottle. The crowd was turning into a mob. Jack pulled out his phone, dialed 911. Sheriff's Department. A bored voice answered. This is Jack Harlow out on Route 12. I've got a hostile crowd on my property, throwing rocks. We're aware of the protest, Mr. Harlow. As long as they stay on public property, they have a right to assemble. They're throwing. If you feel threatened, you're welcome to file a report. But we're stretched thin today. Might be a few hours before someone can get out there. The line went dead. Jack stood there, phone in hand, the shouts of the crowd ringing in his ears. They'd been bought, or threatened, or simply didn't care. He was alone. Inside the house, Ella sat with Preston at the kitchen table. The boy's hands were shaking. His eyes were red from crying. I ruined everything, Preston whispered. No, baby. I did. I thought if I told the truth, people would listen. But they hate us now. They hate Mr. Harlow because of me. Ella pulled him into her arms. You did the right thing. People are just confused. They're not confused. They think I'm a liar. Preston's voice cracked. Maybe I should tell them I was wrong. Maybe if I say I made it up, they'll leave Mr. Harlow alone. Absolutely not. Ella gripped his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. You told the truth. Don't ever apologize for that. But the window shattered. Ella screamed. pulling Preston down as glass exploded across the kitchen floor. A brick skidded to a stop near the table, a note tied around it. Jack burst through the door, saw the destruction, the terror on their faces. "Are you hurt?" "We're fine," Ella said, but her voice shook. Jack picked up the brick, unfolded the note. "Leave town, or it gets worse." His vision went red. He stormed toward the door. "Jack, don't!" Ella shouted. But he was already outside, marching toward the gate. The crowd saw him coming and went silent. Jack stopped at the fence, gripping the metal until his knuckles went white. "You want to come after me? Fine. But you throw one more thing at my house, where a woman and a 10-year-old boy are trying to feel safe for the first time in weeks. And I swear to God, I will make every single one of you regret it." A man in the front, big, barrel-chested, with a sneer on his face, laughed. "You threatening us, Harlow? I'm promising you." Big word for a man who's about to lose everything. The man stepped closer. "The county's revoking your license. Banks call your loans. And when you're bankrupt and broken, nobody's going to remember your name." Jack's fist connected with the man's jaw before he even realized he'd swung. The man went down hard. The crowd erupted. People surged forward. Jack backpedaled, but hands grabbed at him through the fence. And then a gunshot split the air. Everyone froze. Ella stood on the porch, Jack's shotgun pointed at the sky. "The next person who touches him gets the barrel pointed lower," she said, her voice cold as ice. The crowd scattered. Within minutes, the road was empty except for the big man groaning on the ground and the litter of their hatred scattered across Jack's property. Jack stood there, breathing hard, his knuckles bleeding. Ella lowered the gun, her hands shaking. "Get inside," she said. That night, Jack sat alone on the porch. Ella had put Preston to bed, then retreated to her room without a word. The silence was suffocating. Jack stared at his bloody knuckles, at the broken glass glinting in the moonlight, at the empire of peace he'd built crumbling around him. Sarah had called an hour ago. The lawsuit against her was moving forward. Her blog was being taken down. She was facing bankruptcy. The county inspector had delivered notice. Jack's operational license was suspended pending a full review. He had 2 weeks to clear all animals from the property or face criminal charges. The bank had sent a letter. Due to reputational concerns, they were calling in his outstanding loans. Full payment due in 30 days or the ranch would be seized. Everything he'd built, everything he'd fought for, gone. Because he'd tried to do the right thing. The screen door creaked. Ella stepped out, wrapped in a blanket, and sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Ella said, "We should leave." Jack looked at her. "This is our fault," she continued, her voice hollow. "We brought this on you. If Preston and I disappear, maybe they'll leave you alone. Maybe you can salvage." "No, Jack." I said no. His voice was firm. "You're not leaving. You're not running. Not again." Ella's eyes filled with tears. "Then what do we do? Because I can't watch them destroy you. I can't." Her voice broke. "You've given us everything, and we're taking everything from you." Jack reached over, took her hand. "You didn't take anything. I chose this. I'd choose it again." "Why?" Ella whispered. "Why are you willing to lose everything for us?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, at the strength beneath the exhaustion, the fire beneath the fear. "Because you reminded me what I'm supposed to be fighting for," he said. "Not land, not money, people, family." His voice softened. "You and Preston, you made this place feel like home again." A tear slid down Ella's cheek. "I don't know how to save this," Jack admitted. "I don't know if I can, but I know I'm not giving up. Not on you, not in Preston, not the truth." Ella leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." They sat there in the darkness, holding on to each other while the world burned down around them. And in the morning, everything would get worse. The next day, Patrick Charles was rushed to the hospital. The news broke just after dawn. His condition had deteriorated rapidly. He was in critical care, barely conscious. And with him went any chance of stopping the machine he'd built. His lawyers, his corporate team, his PR people, they were running the show now. And they were out for blood. Jack received a notice by courier at 8 a.m. A lawsuit for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. Patrick Charles's estate was suing him for $20 million. Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers. It was over. Even if he sold everything he owned, He couldn't pay a fraction of that. He was finished. Preston appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas. Mr. Harlow. Jack looked up, tried to smile. Failed. Hey, buddy. Are we going to be okay? Jack wanted to lie. Wanted to tell the boy that everything would work out. But he couldn't. I don't know, he said honestly. Preston walked over, climbed into the chair beside him. My dad used to say that even when everything's dark, the sun still comes up. Jack's throat tightened. Your dad was a smart man. Do you believe that? That the sun still comes up? Jack looked at Preston, this boy who'd lost everything and still had hope. Yeah, Jack said quietly. Yeah, I do. But as he stared at the lawsuit, at the shattered glass still littering his floor, at the uncertain future stretching before them, he had no idea how. Everything is falling apart. The darkest hour has come. What do you think happens next? Can Jack find a way out of this? Or is it truly over? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button. The turning point is coming, and you won't believe where this goes. The call came at 2 a.m. Jack jerked awake, his phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, desperation, hope, made him pick up. Mr. Harlow, a woman's voice. Professional. Urgent. Who is this? My name is Rebecca Walsh. I'm Patrick Charles's personal nurse. He asked me to call you. He doesn't have much time, and he needs to see you. Tonight. Jack sat up, fully awake now. What? He wouldn't say. Just that it's urgent. That it's about the lawsuit and redemption. Her voice softened. Mr. Harlow, he's dying. He might not make it through the week. If you're going to come, it has to be now. Jack's mind raced. This could be a trap. Another manipulation. But something in the nurse's voice felt genuine. Where is he? St. Mary's Hospital. Room 417. I'll tell security to expect you. The line went dead. Jack sat in the darkness, his heart pounding. Ella appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a robe. Who was that? Patrick Charles. He wants to see me. Her eyes widened. Jack, you can't. It could be. I know. He stood, reaching for his jacket. But what if it's not? What if he's trying to fix this before he dies? What if he's trying to finish destroying you? Jack paused, looked at her. Then I'll know I tried everything. I'll know I didn't give up. Ella stepped forward, placed her hand on his chest. Then I'm coming with you. Ella, you're not doing this alone. Her eyes were fierce, determined. Jack nodded. Let me get Preston. He's asleep. Sarah's on her way over. I already texted her. She'll stay with him. Jack felt something warm bloom in his chest. Ella was thinking 3 steps ahead. Protecting Preston. Protecting him. Okay, he said quietly. Let's go. The hospital was quiet at this hour. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air. A tired receptionist barely looked up as Jack and Ella signed in. Rebecca Walsh met them at the elevator, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the weary posture of someone who'd seen too much death. Thank you for coming, she said. He's been asking for you for hours. I wasn't sure you'd agree. What's his condition? Jack asked, failing rapidly. The cancer spread to his liver and lungs. He's on morphine for the pain, but he's lucid. For now. She pressed the elevator button. Whatever you need to say to him, say it quickly. The elevator rose in silence. When they reached the 4th floor, Rebecca led them down a quiet hallway to room 417. She paused at the door. He's weak. Please don't upset him more than necessary. Jack nodded. Rebecca pushed open the door. Patrick Charles lay in a hospital bed, barely recognizable. The powerful billionaire who'd once commanded rooms and moved mountains with a phone call now looked like a shadow. His skin was gray, stretched tight over bones. Fur lines snaked from his arms. Machines beeped softly, counting down the time he had left. But his eyes, when they opened and found Jack, were clear. You came, Patrick rasped. Jack stepped inside, Ella close behind him. You asked. Patrick's lips twitched in something that might have been a smile. I wasn't sure you would. After everything, I figured you'd earn 5 minutes. Patrick's gaze shifted to Ella. Mrs. William, I'm sorry for what I did to you and your son. Sorrier than words can express. Ella's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Patrick gestured weakly to the chairs beside his bed. Please, sit. Jack remained standing. Your people are suing me for $20 million. They're destroying Sarah Connor. They've turned the whole town against us. If you're really sorry, call them off. I can't. Patrick's voice was barely a whisper. Can or won't. Can't. I signed over control of my estate to my board of directors when I got the diagnosis. They're protecting the company, my legacy. They think. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. They think I've gone soft. That I'm making decisions based on guilt and pain medication instead of business sense. So you're powerless. In most ways, yes. Patrick's eyes locked onto Jack's. But not in all ways. He reached for a folder on the bedside table, his hand shaking. Rebecca stepped forward to help him. Patrick opened the folder, pulled out a document. This is my personal will, separate from the corporate estate. It contains my private assets, properties, accounts, investments that are mine alone. He held out to Jack. I'm leaving everything to a foundation, the William Family Foundation, to be managed by you and Ella William, with the sole purpose of rebuilding communities displaced by corporate greed. Jack stared at the document, unable to speak. It's worth approximately $200 million, Patrick continued. Enough to rebuild that neighborhood 10 times over. Enough to fight my own lawyers in court and win. Enough to make sure what I did never happens again. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. Jack's mind reeled. What? Because I'm dying, Mr. Harlow. And the only thing I'm taking with me is the truth of who I was. Patrick's voice cracked. I don't want to be remembered as the man who burned children out of their homes for profit. I want to be remembered as the man who tried, in the end, to build something better. This doesn't erase what you did. I know, but maybe it prevents someone else from doing it again. Patrick's breathing was labored now. My lawyers will fight this. They'll claim I'm not a sound mind. But I've had 3 psychiatrists evaluate me. I've documented everything. And I've named someone they can't touch as executor. Who? Patrick's eyes gleamed. Judge Harold Montenegro. He hates me. Has for years. But he's incorruptible. If anyone can make sure my will is executed exactly as written, it's him. Jack looked at Ella. She was crying silently, her hand over her heart. There's one more thing, Patrick said. He pressed a button, and a video screen flickered to life on the wall. Patrick's face appeared, recorded earlier, when he'd had more strength. My name is Patrick Charles. I am of sound mind and body, or as sound as a dying man can be. This is my confession, my testimony, and my final act. Patrick continued, his voice strong and clear. I ordered the displacement of families living on land I wanted for development. When legal channels were too slow, I authorized my security team to use any means necessary. That included arson. I knew people would be hurt. I knew families would be destroyed, and I did it anyway. Jack's breath caught. Jack Harlow and Sarah Connor exposed the truth. They didn't exploit me. They held me accountable. And that accountability is the only thing that gave me a chance at redemption before I die. The video ended. Patrick looked at Jack, exhausted. That's yours. To release however and whenever you choose. It clears your name. It clears the boys. And it makes sure my board can't bury the truth. Jack sank into the chair, overwhelmed. Why now, he whispered. Why not do this from the beginning? Because I was a coward. Patrick's eyes closed. I thought I could control the narrative. I thought I could redeem myself without losing everything. But redemption doesn't work that way, does it? Real redemption costs everything. Silence filled the room, broken only by the beeping of machines. Ella spoke, her voice soft. Do you believe in God, Mr. Charles? Patrick opened his eyes, looked at her. I don't know. I hope so, because I have a lot to answer for. Then I'll pray for you, Ella said, that you find peace, that you find forgiveness. Patrick's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Rebecca stepped forward. He needs to rest now. Jack stood, still holding the folder. Patrick's hand shot out, grabbing Jack's wrist with surprising strength. Tell the boy, Preston, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him he was braver than I ever was. I will. Patrick released him, sinking back into the pillows. Jack and Ella left the room in silence. In the elevator, Ella finally broke. She collapsed against Jack, sobbing, not with sadness, but with relief, with hope, with the overwhelming weight of everything that had just shifted. Jack held her, his own tears falling. We can fight back now, he whispered. We can win. Ella pulled back, looked up at him. Jack, what you did, coming here, hearing him out when you had every reason not to. I almost didn't, but you did, because you're a better man than he ever was. She placed her hand on his cheek. And she stopped, her breath catching. Jack's heart pounded. You what? I'm falling in love with you, she whispered. Time stopped. Jack stared at her, this woman who'd lost everything and still found the strength to hope, to fight, to love. Ella, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Jack pulled her close, pressed his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you too, he breathed. And there, in a hospital elevator at 3 a.m., surrounded by grief and hope and the possibility of new beginnings, they kissed. Soft, tender, full of promise. When they pulled apart, Ella smiled through her tears. What do we do now? Jack looked at the folder in his hand, at the video file, at the key to everything they needed to win. Now we finish this. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the ranch with her laptop and a fire in her eyes. Jack showed her the video. She watched it 3 times, her expression shifting from shock to determination. This changes everything, she said. If we release this. When we release this, Jack corrected. When we release this, Sarah amended. His board won't be able to touch us. The lawsuit disappears. Your ranch is protected, and Preston's name is cleared. So we do it. Now. Wait. Ella placed her hand on Jack's arm. If we release it now, while Patrick's still alive, it destroys him publicly. His last days will be a media circus. Jack paused. You think we should wait? I think we should give him the dignity he never gave us. Ella's voice was steady. We release it after he dies. We clear our names, but we let him pass in peace. Sarah looked at Jack. Your call. Jack thought about Patrick's hollow eyes, about a dying man trying to buy redemption, about mercy. We wait, he said, but we prepare everything. The moment he passes, we go public with everything. Sarah nodded. I'll start drafting the story. Patrick Charles died 3 days later. Peacefully, Rebecca told them, in his sleep. And within an hour of his death, Sarah's article went live. The video, the confession, the will, the foundation, all of it. The internet exploded. Within 6 hours, the article had 5 million views. News networks picked it up. The story went national. And this time, the narrative was different. Dying billionaire's final act of redemption. Leaves fortune to rebuild lives he destroyed. Rancher and homeless boy vindicated as truth emerges. Patrick Charles's last confession. Redemption costs everything. The town that had vilified Jack fell silent. The lawsuit was dropped. The county reinstated his license. The bank withdrew its demands. And Preston William became a symbol, not of exploitation, but of courage. Jack stood on his porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ella stood beside him, her hand in his. Preston was in the yard, playing with the dogs, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Is it really over? Ella asked softly. The fight is, Jack said, but the work's just beginning. She smiled. Building the foundation, building a future. For Preston, for families like yours, for everyone who's been forgotten. Ella leaned her head on his shoulder. We'll do it together. Yeah, Jack said, pulling her close. Together, and for the first time in weeks. The sun didn't just come up. It shone. The turning point has arrived. Hope is restored, but the final battle still awaits. Are you ready for the climax? Drop a comment if this story has moved you, and make sure you're subscribed because the next part is going to blow your mind. The fight wasn't over. 2 weeks after Patrick's death, his board of directors filed an emergency motion to invalidate the will. Their argument was simple and brutal. Patrick Charles had been under extreme duress, medicated, and mentally compromised when he made his final arrangements. The will was the product of manipulation by opportunistic individuals who exploited a dying man's guilt. They wanted the $200 million returned to the corporate estate. They wanted the foundation dissolved. And they wanted Jack Harlow prosecuted for elder abuse and fraud. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at the county courthouse. Judge Harold Montenegro presiding. Jack sat in Sarah's office the night before, reviewing their case with her, and a pro bono lawyer she'd found. A young woman named Clarice Starling who specialized in estate law and had a reputation for demolishing corporate bullies. They're going to come at you hard, Clarice said, flipping through documents. They'll paint you as a con artist. They'll question Preston's testimony. They'll bring in psychiatrists to claim Patrick wasn't competent. But we have the video, Jack said. We have 3 independent psychiatric evaluations confirming he was of sound mind. And they'll argue those doctors were paid off or deceived. Clarice leaned forward. Jack, these people have unlimited resources. They'll bury us in motions, appeals, expert witnesses. Even if we win tomorrow, they can drag this out for years. Ella, sitting beside Jack, paled. So what do we do? Clarice smiled, sharp and dangerous. We don't just win. We annihilate them. We make it so public, so undeniable, that they have no choice but to surrender. Ow, Jack asked. We bring the people Patrick hurt. We fill that courtroom with every family that lost their home. We make the board look those families in the eye while they argue that Patrick wasn't sincere in wanting to make things right. She looked at Preston, who sat quietly in the corner. And we put this brave young man on the stand. Preston's eyes widened. Jack shook his head. No, he's been through enough. Mr. Harlow, Preston said quietly. I want to do it. Everyone turned to look at him. The boy stood, his small frame rigid with determination. Mr. Charles said I was brave. I want to prove he was right. Ella's eyes filled with tears. Baby, Mama, this is why we're here. This is why Mr. Harlow fought for us. Preston looked at Jack. I'm not scared anymore. I want to finish this. Jack felt his throat tighten. This kid, this incredible, resilient kid. Okay, Jack said. We do this together. Monday morning, the courthouse was packed. Every seat filled. Standing room only. News cameras lined the hallway outside. Jack walked in with Ella, Preston, Sarah, and Clarice. On the other side of the aisle sat Patrick's board. 6 men and 2 women in expensive suits, flanked by a team of lawyers led by Vincent Vega. The air crackled with tension. Judge Harold Montenegro entered, and everyone stood. Montenegro was 70, silver-haired, with eyes like flint and a reputation for suffering no fools. He'd been a circuit judge for 30 years, and nobody, not corporations, not politicians, not billionaires, intimidated him. He sat, banged his gavel once. Let's begin. Vega went first. He was smooth, polished, and persuasive. He painted a picture of Patrick Charles as a titan of industry, brought low by illness and manipulated in his weakest moment. Patrick Charles built an empire that employed thousands, funded hospitals, supported schools, Vega said. And in his final days, suffering from unbearable pain and heavy medication, he was approached by individuals who saw an opportunity. He gestured to Jack. Jack Harlow, a man facing financial ruin. Sarah Connor, a journalist whose career was failing. And a traumatized child, coached to tell a story that would tug at a dying man's heartstrings. Preston flinched. Ella squeezed his hand. Vega continued. The will in question was signed under duress, without proper legal counsel present, and contradicts decades of Mr. Charles's documented business philosophy. We ask this court to honor the real Patrick Charles, the builder, the employer, the philanthropist, not the ghost manipulated by vultures in his final hours. He sat. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Montenegro's expression was unreadable. Miss Starling, your opening statement. Clarice stood, buttoned her blazer, and walked to the center of the room. Your Honor, the defense would have you believe that a man who spent his final days confronting the harm he'd caused was somehow less himself than the man who spent decades prioritizing profit over people. She paused. We're here to prove the opposite. That Patrick Charles was never more himself, never more honest, never more human, than when he chose redemption over reputation. She turned to face the board. And we're going to prove it with his own words. She nodded to Sarah, who started the video. Patrick's face filled the screen, mounted on the wall. The courtroom went silent as his recorded confession played. I ordered the displacement of families living on land I wanted for development. When legal channels were too slow, I authorized my security team to use any means necessary. That included arson. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Vega jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this video was recorded while Mr. Charles was heavily medicated. I'll determine relevance, Mr. Vega. Montenegro's voice was ice. Sit down. Vega sat. Clarice called her first witness, Dr. Helen Ramirez, one of the psychiatrists who'd evaluated Patrick. Dr. Ramirez testified that Patrick had been lucid, coherent, and decisional. That his choices reflected genuine remorse, not diminished capacity. Vega tried to tear her apart on cross-examination, but she didn't budge. Then Clarice called Rebecca Walsh, Patrick's nurse. Rebecca described Patrick's final days, his insistence on making things right, his clarity of purpose, his peace when the will was signed. "He told me," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion, that it was the first time in years he'd felt like he was doing something that mattered. Vega objected, called a hearsay. Montenegro overruled. Then Clarice did something unexpected. "Your Honor, we'd like to call a member of the defense's own team. Mr. Vincent Vega." The courtroom gasped. Vega's face went red. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular, and yet permissible," Montenegro said. "Mr. Vega, take the stand." Vega looked like he'd swallow glass, but he complied. Clarice approached, holding a document. "Mr. Vega, you were Patrick Charles's personal attorney for 15 years, correct?" "Yes." "And you were present at the hospital when he signed his will?" Vega hesitated. "I was nearby." "Nearby, but not in the room?" "No." "Why not?" "I wasn't summoned." "Because Patrick didn't want you there, did he?" "Because he knew you'd try to talk him out of it." Objection. Speculation. Sustained. Clarice held up the document. "This is a letter from Patrick Charles to you, dated 3 days before his death. Did you receive it?" Vega's jaw tightened. "Yes." "What did it say?" "I don't recall." "Let me refresh your memory." Clarice read aloud. "Vincent, I know you'll fight my final wishes. I know you'll call me weak or compromised. But for once in my life, I'm choosing to be right instead of rich. Don't fight this. Let me die having built something good." She lowered the letter. "Does that sound like a man who wasn't in control of his faculties?" Vega said nothing. No further questions. Finally, Clarice called Preston to the stand. The boy walked forward, small and nervous, and climbed into the witness chair. The bailiff adjusted the microphone for him. Judge Montenegro looked down kindly. "Son, do you understand you're under oath?" "Yes, sir." "Then let's hear what you have to say." Clarice approached gently. "Preston, can you tell the court what happened the night your home burned down?" Preston took a breath, and then he told the story. Every detail. The fire, the men, the blueprint, his mother collapsing, finding Jack. The courtroom was riveted. When he finished, Clarice asked, "Did anyone tell you what to say today?" "No, ma'am." "Are you here because someone promised you money?" "No, ma'am. I'm here because Mr. Charles wanted to do the right thing, and because Mr. Harlow taught me that telling the truth is always worth it." Clarice smiled. "Thank you, Preston." Vega stood for cross-examination, but one look at Preston's earnest face, at the tears on Ella's cheeks, at the packed courtroom watching. He sat back down. "No questions, Your Honor." Judge Montenegro called a 15-minute recess. When he returned, his expression was granite. "I've reviewed the evidence. I've heard the testimony, and I've made my decision." The courtroom held its breath. Patrick Charles's will is valid and binding. The foundation will proceed as written, with Jack Harlow and Ella William as trustees. The board's motion to invalidate is denied. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Jack felt Ella grab his hand, felt Preston throw his arms around him. But Montenegro wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, banging his gavel for silence, "I'm ordering a full investigation into Charles Development Group's business practices over the past decade. If evidence of criminal wrongdoing is found, appropriate charges will be filed." The board members went pale. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was massive. Families whose homes had burned. Supporters. Press. Jack stood on the steps with Ella and Preston, overwhelmed. Sarah stepped up to the microphone someone had set up. Today, justice was served. Not just for Preston William, but for every family that Patrick Charles hurt. And because of one man's courage, Jack Harlow, and one boy's bravery, Preston William, $200 million will now rebuild lives instead of lining corporate pockets. The crowd roared. Jack looked at Preston, who was smiling. Really, truly smiling. Ella leaned in, kissed Jack's cheek. "We did it." "No," Jack said, pulling her close. "We're just getting started. Justice has been served. The truth has won. But there's still one more chapter to this story, the ending that will bring it all home. Are you ready? Drop a comment telling me what you think happens next. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. The conclusion is going to leave you with tears of joy. 6 months later, Preston stood in the middle of an empty field, holding a shovel that was almost as tall as he was. Around him, 50 other families held shovels too. Behind them, a massive banner read, "The William Family Foundation, breaking ground on new beginnings." Television cameras captured everything, but Preston barely noticed them anymore. He was too busy staring at the spot where, in 6 months, his new home would stand. Not a shack, not a shelter, a real home, with his name on the deed. Jack stood beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder. Ella was on Preston's other side, radiant in a simple blue dress, her face glowing with hope that had seemed impossible just half a year ago. Sarah called out from behind her camera, "Okay, everyone, on 3, we break ground together. 1, 2, 3. 50 shovels bit into the earth, and the rebuilding began. The months since the trial had been a whirlwind. Jack and Ella had thrown themselves into running the foundation, working 18-hour days to ensure every displaced family got not just a house, but support, job training, education assistance, medical care. The foundation didn't just rebuild structures. It rebuilt lives. They'd hired David Mills, the former head of security who confessed to the arson after he'd served 6 months in jail and genuinely sought redemption. He now ran the foundation's security and outreach programs, working directly with the families he'd once terrorized. People deserve second chances, Jack had said when some board members objected. Patrick taught us that. The town had changed too. The same people who'd thrown rocks at Jack's ranch now volunteered at foundation events. Shame had a way of inspiring action, and the community had chosen to heal rather than hide. Preston had become something of a local hero, the boy who'd stood up to a billionaire and won. Schools invited him to speak. Kids asked for his autograph. But Preston remained humble, grounded by the two people who mattered most, his mother and the man who'd become like a father to him. On the night after the groundbreaking, Jack's ranch felt different. The animals had multiplied. More rescues, more strays finding refuge. But now there was also laughter, warmth, the feeling of family that had been missing for so long. Preston sat at the kitchen table doing homework while Jack cooked dinner. Ella was in the living room, on the phone with a family applying for foundation assistance, her voice patient and kind. It was domestic, simple, beautiful. When dinner was ready, they gathered around the table, the same table where Preston had first eaten after losing everything. "Mr. Harlow," Preston said, poking at his mashed potatoes, "can I ask you something?" "Always. When are you going to ask my mama to marry you?" Jack choked on his water. Ella's eyes went wide. Preston looked between them, confused. "What? Everyone knows you love each other. You hold hands. You look at each other all mushy. Just make it official already." Ella's face turned crimson. "Preston William. He's not wrong," Jack said quietly. The room went still. Jack stood, walked to the counter, and pulled something from a drawer. A small velvet box. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. Jack knelt beside her chair, opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a single diamond. "I bought this 3 weeks ago," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been waiting for the right moment. But Preston's right. There's no moment more right than this. Right here, right now, with the people who become my family." Tears streamed down Ella's face. "Ella William," Jack continued, "you came into my life when I'd forgotten what hope felt like. You and Preston reminded me why I'm here, what I'm fighting for. You made this house a home again." His voice cracked. "Will you marry me?" Ella couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears falling freely. Jack slipped the ring on her finger, and she pulled him up, kissed him deeply. Preston cheered, jumping from his chair. Finally, they laughed through their tears, holding each other. A family, not built by blood but by choice, by love, by survival. The wedding was small, just close friends at the ranch on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Sarah officiated, beaming with joy. Preston served as best man, his chest puffed with pride in his new suit. Rebecca Walsh attended, along with several families from the foundation. Even Clarice Starling flew in, hugging everyone and crying happy tears. When Jack and Ella exchanged vows under an arch decorated with wildflowers, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. "I promise to love you," Jack said, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. "To fight for you. To build a life with you that honors everything we've survived and everything we've become. I promise to stand beside you, Ella said, her voice strong and clear. To remind you every day that you saved us, that you gave us a future when we had none, that you're the best man I've ever known. They kissed as husband and wife, and the small crowd erupted in applause. Preston ran forward, wrapping his arms around both of them. We're a real family now, he whispered. We always were, Jack whispered back. 1 year after the trial, the first phase of the neighborhood reconstruction was complete. 50 new homes stood where ashes had once covered the ground. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds, families moving into their new homes, community members celebrating, press documenting the transformation. Preston and his mother, now Ella Harlow, stood in front of their new house. It was beautiful. 2 stories, a front porch, a yard where Preston could play. But more than that, it was theirs. Legally, permanently, irrevocably theirs. Preston held the key, staring at it in wonder. Jack knelt beside him. You ready? I'm scared, Preston admitted. Of what? That it's not real. That I'll wake up and we'll be back under that bridge. Jack placed his hand on Preston's shoulder. It's real, son, and it's never going away. This is your home, your foundation, your future. Preston looked at the house, then at his mother, then at Jack. Can I call you Dad? Jack's breath caught. He'd wondered when, or if, this moment would come. Preston, you don't have to. I want to, if that's okay. Jack pulled the boy into his arms, holding him tight. It's more than okay, he whispered. It will be the greatest honor of my life. Preston hugged him back, and Ella wrapped her arms around both of them. A family, forged in fire, tempered by love. That evening, as the sun set over the new neighborhood, Jack stood with Ella on their new porch. Preston was inside, exploring every room for the 10th time, his laughter echoing through the walls. We did it, Ella said softly, leaning against Jack. Yeah, we did. What do you think Patrick would say if he could see this? Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking about the dying man who'd chosen redemption over reputation. I think he'd say it was worth it. Ella nodded. I forgave him, you know, last week. I went to his grave and told him. Jack looked at her, surprised. Why? Because holding on to anger was like carrying a piece of that fire everywhere I went. And I didn't want Preston to grow up with that weight. She turned to face Jack. Patrick gave us the tools to rebuild, but you gave us the reason to. You taught us that one person's courage can change everything. Jack shook his head. I didn't do anything special. You did the one thing most people want. When the world was burning, you ran toward the flames instead of away from them. She kissed him, soft and sweet. When they pulled apart, Preston called from inside. Mom, Dad, come see which room is mine. Dad. The words settled into Jack's heart like it had always belonged there. They walked inside together, into warmth and light and laughter. Into the home they'd built from ashes. Into the future they'd fought for. Into love. Epilogue. 3 years later, the William Family Foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. 500 families rehoused. 12 communities were rebuilt across 3 states. A model replicated by organizations nationwide. Jack and Ella ran it together, a perfect partnership of compassion and strategy. Preston, now 13, spoke at conferences and schools, inspiring young people to stand up for justice. Sarah had published a book about the case, From Ash to Hope, How One Boy Changed Everything, which became a bestseller and further funded the foundation's work. And Jack's ranch had become a training center, teaching displaced families sustainable living and animal care. On a warm spring evening, Jack sat on his porch, the original ranch, where it all began, with Ella beside him and Preston sprawled on the steps doing homework. A little girl, 2 years old with Ella's eyes and Jack's stubborn chin, toddled across the yard chasing a puppy. Her name was Lily. Jack watched her, his heart full beyond measure. He'd lost one Lily to a system that valued money over mercy. But he'd been given another chance to build a world where children like her, and Preston, and all the kids in those rebuilt neighborhoods, would never have to choose between survival and dignity. Penny for your thoughts? Ella asked. Jack smiled, pulling her close. Just thinking about how one moment can change everything. One choice, one act of courage, or one boy crying in the rain, Ella added softly. Preston looked up from his homework. I wasn't that dramatic. Yes, you were, Jack and Ella said in unison. They laughed. Little Lily ran over, climbed into Jack's lap, muddy hands and all. He held her, breathing in the moment. The smell of fresh grass, the sound of his family's laughter, the warmth of the setting sun. This was redemption. Not Patrick's alone, but Jack's too. Not erasure of the past, but transformation of the future. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jack Harlow understood something profound. The world would always have fires, but it would also always have people willing to run toward the flames. And sometimes that made all the difference. Thank you for taking this journey with us. From a homeless boy crying in the rain to a family rebuilt and a community restored. This is what happens when courage meets compassion. If this story moved you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What was your favorite moment? What lesson will you carry with you? And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories of hope, stories of redemption, stories that remind us that even in our darkest hours, the sun still comes up. See you in the next one. Until then, keep believing in the power of doing what's right, even when it costs everything. Because in the end, that's what builds a life worth living.